Hey, this is Pete Saronis, and welcome to Bits, Bytes, and Insights, where we examine the link between technology, infrastructure, and humanity. I'm your host, Pete Saronis, founder and CEO of Dots and Bridges. And in this episode, we're going to focus on how technology is bridging government, industry, and academia for a greater good. Today, I'm excited to have my colleague, Kynan Carver, Cybersecurity Managing Director at Maximus, a company leading the way in providing secure, human-centered technology solutions to our federal partners. And we're going to focus on one of my favorite sectors in the critical infrastructure space today, energy. Kynan's work centers on developing and implementing advanced cybersecurity solutions that support the Department of Defense, federal civilian teams, and many other institutions. His leadership demonstrates a strong dedication to safeguarding national interests while advancing the mission of public service. Kynan, welcome to Bits, Bytes, and Insights.
Good to be here, Pete.
Great to see you, my friend. And you know, when I do these conversations and when folks watch this, a big part of it is getting to know the people behind the brand, behind the logo. And while we love the Maximus logo, the purple, I love it. It's one of my favorite colors outside of orange. I think it's important that we get to know the people, the individual. You know, what brought you here? What was your personal and professional journey like? So let's start with that. You know, let's humanize yourself. And I call this the foundation. So let's get to know a little bit about you and just, you know, what brought you to where you are today and kind of what influenced you along the way.
Great question. So I really started my IT career, and let me just start by saying, like, cybersecurity, at least for myself, wasn't just a straight journey, right? It wasn't just a straight path. It's kind of a winding path. But I started my journey actually within the Air National Guard in Georgia, actually. And I joined that unit for a very particular purpose. One was to serve my nation, of course. This is just right after 9/11. But two, I was kind of older in life, right? So I was actually 24, turning 25, had 2 kids. So the military really allowed me to springboard my career in IT to a whole nother level. And so following that time in the Air National Guard, which was roughly 6 years, I ended up taking a civil servant job within the unit, which eventually brought me to Virginia, which it was my first contracting gig actually for a DISA program. And from there, it just really grew into IT operations, and then eventually into cyber operations once I got really into the Special Access Program community, which is underneath the DoD. And for those who don't know what SAP is essentially one of those, if you ever think of the new stealth bomber, that's what the Special Access Program is, right? It's the secrets of the secrets. And so that really brought me into my whole cybersecurity journey. As you can imagine, like, the importance of doing cybersecurity in that space was just so paramount.
Well, let me just interject, because too, you and your journey mirrors a little bit of mine. I fell into the Pentagon when I was 21, and it was pre-internet, so I'm aging myself. But most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And I think what's exciting about talking to you, and I'm already getting a sense of that, is you are evolving your professional development as the world is becoming accustomed to the impact of digital technologies and specifically security. Fair enough?
Oh, very fair. And I think you know, when I joined the Air National Guard, right, like, to your point, it was kind of a normal baseline in regards to routers, switches, your typical
ping, power,
telco.
and pipe.
Exactly.
I dig it.
Exactly. But today's world with AI, I think you're going to see another transformation of both your existing cybersecurity practitioners and what the new world of cybersecurity is going to be. So I think you're going to see people reinventing themselves again. And I think that's actually key to being successful in IT or cybersecurity or just in this domain, is the ability to accept change.
And is that something that you felt when you were going through it? I know for me it was working in a data center, you know, what's a router, what's a switch, how does it tie to but that learning, I was very heavily influenced by a lot of the practitioners. I mean, these were folks, when I was a federal director of a data center, it was these folks who were super talented and smart, running firewalls and running the servers over here and connecting the fiber cable. I learned so much from them. Did you have influences like that in the operations domain?
Oh, absolutely. Being in the military, right, you're surrounded by both your officer corps and your enlisted corps. And the Air Force is kind of unique in the sense that we don't have a warrant officer class. So really the preponderance of, you know, we'll just say IT operations sits on the enlisted corps. I say all that because, like, there is so much there in regards to the military and your ability to tap into those people's experience, knowledge. And that translated into the actual career I had in the International Guard, which is all about combat comms. And in particular, I ended up supporting the Special Forces as part of that. So it was actually part of a JCSC unit down in MacDill.
Yeah, and when I think of the Department of Defense, we do, and we all know in the federal government, which is massive, some of the factoids I always like for our audience to recognize is, depending on where you look, there's 430 plus agencies in the federal space, whether it's current, you could check it out on Federal Register, to be able to adapt a capability or a knowledge, and we'll get to what you're doing at Maximus specifically, as well as some of your future focus, but for the here and now as you're evolving as an individual, right? Your experience with our defense, our military, your practitioner yourself. What was the trigger that you found to be, I like this IT stuff? Because for me, what triggered me to go back to school, I was a communications major, wanted to be a sports broadcaster. But when I fell into the internet and I realized, in '92, it's not computer science, it was going to change the world. What was one of those triggers for you where as you're going through it, you realize this is a career for me?
Oh yeah, when I was learning networking, in fact. I mean, the idea of just, you're both physically building something and then you had to mentally build at the same time, right? So that's the physical plane of networking, where you're connecting wires to boxes, et cetera, et cetera. And then you had to go into the actual device through the command line and actually, logically build out that infrastructure. That took off in my mind, right? Like that took off in the sense that you can have both worlds, right? You can do something physical and do something, mental, and then combine that into, well, again, combat comms here, like a highly compressed, highly contentious environment just drove that idea, like this is the right place for me to be.
Yeah, I hear you and think about when I served as a civilian in the Defense Department, the just being around the military and the mission, save lives, protect, our country, and here we are, and wow, there's just so many agencies that have so many unique missions, whether it's energy, transportation, healthcare, IRS, you name it. You're kind of with DoD and all these federal civilian, you're seeing a lot of different mission, but needing some of the same capabilities. Is that fair? Whether it's IT or operational technology?
Fair.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Cybersecurity is cybersecurity. Either you're in the federal space, local, it doesn't really matter, right? Like it is the same across. And the impact if you don't do cybersecurity, or if you do cybersecurity well, is the same, right? I think the only difference is how many people are affected by your decisions ultimately, right? So if you start going to the federal government, or even the DoD, there's obviously a much broader scale of the impact of cybersecurity practitioners.
So let me just ask this question that is a follow-on. It just came to me. Here you are, you're a cybersecurity professional, you're working at a great company, you're kind of the guy. I mean, I've known you for a while, and when I think of cybersecurity, immediately I'm like, speed dial to Kynan if I have a specific question. How is your aptitude, your knowledge, how are you sharing that in the culture of where you are?
Great question.
And next generation. I mean, do you think about like, and I tell my kids, it's like, you might want to study this, take a cyber class.
Absolutely, and I have a slew of kids myself. But it's always on my mind, right? So the military's good about distilling the idea that you have to pass down your knowledge to the next troop or soldier or airman, et cetera. That became kind of an ethos for me. And to me, I think that's an imperative if you're in my position, right? That you need to be able to push that information down and give, those up-and-coming cybersecurity practitioners the ability to be exposed to information sooner than later, just because you never know what their path is going to look like. Like I said in the beginning, my path was winding, and so the more that I can get these younger individuals exposed, the better. And on that note, some of the things that I've personally got involved in is we have a lot of connections into universities and colleges, and part of that is both mentorship, but also, projects, right? So what a better experience if Maximus giving a project, for example, to WVU and saying, hey, we want you to work on the next era of compliance, and allow those students to develop something kind of in a guided vacuum that is purposely built for the federal government writ large.
I appreciate that, and your nice segue. We're going to jump into some of that. WVU, I'm going to assume West Virginia University, go Mountaineers, even though I have a Pittsburgh tied to family, so the backyard brawl's a real thing. Well, listen,
Yep.
you've painted a picture. I love it. And it's this journey that I always talk about, both personal and professional, and here you are. We're going to be interested in hearing a bit more here in the next segment about how that influence and knowledge that you have is being shared across the Maximus family, from data to technology to even some of the other impact areas that are other agencies. So we'll get to that in the next segment.
Sounds great.
All
Thanks,
right.
Pete.
Hey, we're back with Kynan Carver of Maximus. And Kynan, it was so cool to get to know you, even though I kind of knew you, but I hope anybody watching understands this guy is passionate, he's disciplined, and I know you love what you do. I want to shift into this. If the foundation is what you are, let's talk about the focus currently at Maximus, right? I mean, you're at a company, you've been at many companies, but I know the company itself, Maximus, is really, really laser focused on nation's critical infrastructure sectors, and we may highlight a bit of that around the energy space. So, what's happening now? Talk a little bit about what it is Maximus really represents in the federal DMV, yes, but as a company that actually has that heart and wants to help the mission advance in the federal space.
Yeah, so Maximus traditionally is known for contact centers, and for the audience, think of that as kind of help desk, as you will. Like if you call in to just say the veterans, right, for evaluation, that's one of the contracts that we have. We're really passionate about connecting with our citizens, right, our common
Service
people.
to citizens
Absolutely.
is a phrase we use in DC a lot.
Exactly. And so that is our main focus, right? So how can we serve the citizens in a meaningful way? And I think at Maximus we're doing that in spades, quite honestly. We're doing that at scale. But I think where it starts to transcend into the cybersecurity side, and that's the part that I run, is how do we make sure that those interactions are safe, right? That gives the citizen confidence that Maximus is doing the right things by federal laws and federal practices, but more importantly, are trying to advance ultimately the experience of the federal government as is delivered to their citizens themselves.
So let's break for a minute and just get everybody to think about the expanse of, we know the federal government is huge, and every agency, and I know you and I have talked about this over and over, just because you're talking AI or cybersecurity or data analytics at agency X doesn't mean it's the same exact need in agency Y. You kind of need to know the mission. You obviously do, and talk a lot about. We did this in our prep call. He just kind of spoke a bit about doing the homework. It's one thing to sell a solution, but it's like to retrofit, and I really, really appreciated that. You mentioned regulatory, the energy sector, which is one of 16 sectors in our country that the Department of Energy happens to oversee and so forth. Is really focused constantly on the grid. It's focused on operational technology, information technology. Can you pivot to a little bit about that exemplar, since you wanted to leverage that as sort of a talking point here, which is the energy sector is massive, and there isn't going to be one cyber solution, but knowing how to, again, map that is something that you take near and dear to your heart.
I certainly do, and I think we're at an interesting time in history where the speed of technology is now driving the need for more energy, right? More energy production. And you're seeing that with the recent executive orders. And just to kind of size it up real quick, right?
Paint a picture.
Paint a picture, right?
Yeah.
So the amount of energy that these AI data centers will eventually require is something like 56 megawatts of energy, which I believe accounts to essentially the size of Texas. So if you extrapolate that in regards to the energy requirements, they're going to be coming to the America here soon, just that need alone is tremendous. But on top of that, having to secure that through operational technology, through obviously compliance, through et cetera, that's a big challenge. And something that we have to focus on, and this administration has kind of decoupled some of the requirements, the federal mandates for us to not necessarily report, but to allow for the commercial space to kind of be free to move, free to invent, and free to deliver what this is going to be critical power to this new emerging industry.
Yeah, I'm going to just reference for folks, because kind of these are some things you and I were prepping for. I mean, there's 3 executive orders this calendar year: strengthening the reliability and security of the U.S. electric grid in April, deploying advanced nuclear reactor technologies for national security, sustaining select efforts to strengthen the nation's cybersecurity. All these came out early in the year. I mean, this is just, not just for the energy sector and the department, but there's a relationship with DOE and DOD and Department of Transportation, for example. And I know that energy security focus is something that you obviously hit on. I want to pull a thread on the OT, operational technology, and the IT, information technology convergence. I know that's very, very important to you and something we've talked about, because I think that's a point today and now in government where when Colonial Pipeline was hit, or it was threatened, it was deemed vulnerable. And that's where I think folks really started to understand the distinction between, in the digital world we live in, IT now has to live with operational technology, which is a lot of the legacy systems. So, can you comment a little bit on how do you bridge that? Well, sometimes it's not a rip and replace, hate the phrase, but it's how do we get the stuff that we're focused on here at Maximus to work with things that really can't be disconnected, right?
Yeah, what a challenging question. Simply, right, just really quickly, like operational technology within the, in that context of energy, right? We're talking about industrial control systems, we're talking about like physical control systems, et cetera, and how that is then interjected or inputted into the IT system for like monitoring, for example, at the SOC, right, is a challenge, right? Because a lot of these OT systems, like you said, are legacy systems that were built potentially up to 50 years ago that doesn't necessarily have a direct applicability, the ability to be programmed or used on the existing infrastructure today, right? So we're talking about potentially, OT equipment that doesn't have even a networking card, for example. How do you connect something like a water system that's disconnected, right, intentionally, and then bring that back to the essentially the IT system for both monitoring and then access and oversight, right? So those are some of the challenges that you're dealing with legacy OT. I think with the advent of AI and some of the emerging technology, you're going to start seeing that gap shorten, just because you're going to have an inline translator, for lack of a better term, right? So you're going to have this legacy system that's outputting data in this very old format. And then you're essentially going to have a system that translates that and gets that connected online.
Yeah, and I want to save some of that, like where we're going, because that you gave a nice little teaser there. But I want to come back to, again, something that I think is critical, and that is understanding environment and architecture. There's a strategic, you said to me, Pete, there's strategic, tactical, and operational considerations. And as a cybersecurity guy, can you talk a little bit about Maximus? Because I know you're doing some neat stuff with one of our national labs, right up there in Western Pennsylvania, National Energy Technology Laboratory. Hybrid solutions for cloud, and you're in the counter intel and intel space. I mean, these things can actually translate to experiences that other agencies and businesses and public and private sector can leverage. You want to expound a little bit on that?
Yeah. So again, part of our work with that lab is both the supercomputer itself. The supercomputer's there for all sorts of reasons, model simulation, et cetera, to allow the lab to kind of get at the forefront of what they're trying to solve. But that, and bringing that agency with that supercomputer in kind of a more legacy format into what we ended up doing is bringing them into the cloud and getting that secured, was an interesting project, and something that we're actually kind of proud about, because we're able to do that both at scale, but more importantly at speed, right? So I'll just give you a quick example.
Please.
So, basically Maximus was asked to kind of help, Nettle, that's what we're talking about.
The NETL by some standards.
But help Nettle actually bring into the new TIC.3 environment. And so we ended up accomplishing that by connecting them into the Google Cloud, so GCP. And we're able to do that in essentially 3 months, which was super rapid.
Wow.
And that's just one example of the many things that we're trying to work with Nettle and trying to expedite their, like to our statements earlier, kind of pick their legacy system and bring it into a more modern world that allows them to be connected and for us to kind of get at those challenges.
And there you hit on, well, that's obviously an awesome story. Facts tell, stories sell. I love the storytelling. And that modernization effort is also transformative. And again, the audience, our national laboratory ecosystem, there's 17 national labs. And you all are in one of them. That's awesome. NETL, West Virginia, Pittsburgh, shout out Western PA. The only one that's government owned and government operated. So that's amazing. Now, before we close the segment out, that experience though, right? Going back to your journey in this world of the culture, even at Maximus. I've seen Bruce, your leader of Maximus, speak about culture and connection and connecting with people. When you take on projects, whether it's with a lab or with an agency, there's also the culture in the government that needs to understand what you're bringing to the table is not to replace, but to augment or complement. Is that something you're seeing? How important is that to the Maximus community, where we're going in as teachers, we're not looking to necessarily take over the job, but actually innovate and have the folks be a part of that?
And I think that's a core principle at Maximus, that we're partners of the government, right? Like we're partners, and we're there to help in whatever capacity we're allowed to, right? And I think that is crucial in the way that we advance both the federal government and really get at some of the issues that we talked about earlier, and dealing with some of the more nuanced challenges for like OT, back to that statement again. I think that's paramount. And Bruce Caswell, our CEO, is actually affirmative of that, right? He really believes in generating that culture within Maximus. And then again, citizens first, like our customers first, like that is paramount. Because that's just simply, it's good service, right?
It is, and I just think those are words people say in this town very loosely, but I know, obviously preparing to chat with you, how much that matters to you, and again, getting to know some of the folks around town, that's what defines you in many sectors, so I appreciate that. And I want to get into this future forward-leaning brain of yours, but wow, just to close out, the mission-driven focus, I appreciate that. Having worked in government for 25 years as a CTO in 2 stops, it was so amazing to have a company that would bring in that partnership mentality. So kudos to you and the Maximus team. Hi, we're back with Kynan Carver from Maximus, and we've had an awesome conversation. We've learned a little bit about you, we learned a little bit about the company, what you're focused on, what you're grounded in, and now we're going to talk about the future. And I like this segment because it's where we take that step back and look a little bit forward. Vision, optimism, and how is technology serving that greater good? How does humanity benefit from all of this stuff that we use each and every day? So why don't we start there? I mean, now you probably get asked a lot as someone who is living in the present but knows where things are going. I think it's important too that you've shared that Maximus is always thinking about the future. That's why you have roadmaps and the like. Feel free to filter in 1 or 2 of those exemplars. But what excites you, and I know you're going to go the AI route, but break that down a little bit for us. What are you seeing is going to be so impactful on the greater good in the next several years?
Oh, wow. Interesting you bringing that up. I actually had a conversation with my oldest daughter about AI. She's a Gen Z, right?
All
and
right.
So if you're tracking, Gen Z is very distrustful of AI. And I quickly, and for those, I think this is kind of fun to talk about real quickly.
Keeping it real.
That's
what I love.
right? So it's interesting because my generation, I don't have that same proclivity of mistrusting AI. I think it's a natural evolution of how technology has come to the forefront. And part of that is, I mean, granted, I'm in cybersecurity, I've been in the IT space for quite some time here, and I understand how AI was born out and what it is behind that black box. So me, for the distrust of AI isn't there, but it's interesting to hear her distrust. And what I told her was essentially, you haven't seen this massive migration of technology before. This is your first exposure to this. Like, I've seen it repeatedly throughout my career. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why I got into IT itself. But like, your ability to see and interact with this new technology is fundamentally different than what you have exposed or been exposed to before. And so I extrapolate that to kind of the federal world, right? in the sense that like this is a massive pivot point where we're able to essentially use these advanced technologies, not to necessarily replace us, but to augment us, right? So as we're going down through the AI journey, I mean, most everybody knows what ChatGPT is and the power of ChatGPT. Most people are now consuming it on their daily lives, which is fantastic.
Who doesn't use it?
Who doesn't
right?
use it? And if you haven't used it, I strongly encourage you to get involved and start using it, because that is essentially your new way of learning and interacting with data. And I think, fast forward, you're going to start seeing agentic AI. There's technically already here with certain applications. We're going to start seeing the agentic AI be in common. And the reason the difference between your standard AI, right, your LLMs, your generic AI, and your
large
agentic,
language models.
Yep,
Those of
your
you who are
large
tracking our
language
buzzword
model.
bingo here.
Right. So an agentic, you're going to allow it to act on your behalf.
Yes.
That's the real difference, right? Yeah. So currently with your ChatGPTs, you're just simply asking questions, it's returning answers that you ask. You start getting to the next layer where you're asking it to, for example, make some code for you, and it starts to build out the code. It's starting to act independently of you. Well, fast forward, agentic AI essentially is going to do all of that. You're simply going to ask it to do something, it will reason through it, and it will act with purpose on that statement that you put in. That's what you're seeing as a future state. I don't think that's an actual issue. I think really what you're going to see in the federal space in regards to regulation is how much human in the loop during that decision cycle you want. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. Growing up in the federal government and then getting to Department of Energy in the last 9 years of my career, I used to hear about computer in the loop, human in the loop, human-centered technology,
Yeah.
human-focused. I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that's important, folks, and maybe dispel the myth. Let's dispel a few myths too, right? I mean, you mentioned agentic and there's physical. It's like now you better know what AI is, and I know you do, and I know that's a focus at Maximus. But like what type of AI is needed for the mission that we in government or we in Agency X need to know about? And part of that is that doing the homework and partnership that I know is so important to you. So let me pull that one a little bit too. So when it comes to these new technologies, whether it's AI or even cloud and how we're protecting data in the cloud, how do you dispel the myth again to your customer where there's still the human in the loop that's needed, right? This isn't just, hey, it's going to do your job. Now maybe some jobs could be deemed, they could be 24/7. How do you have that conversation that's a little touch and go today with your customer?
So I think the federal government has been pretty clear about their adoption of AI. And I think that where you're going to start seeing it again is the balance between how much are you going to allow that AI to act upon the information that you have given it. I think that is really the trade space. And personally, where I think that's going is essentially it's going to be more than just automation. Automation isn't AI, right? Like there's a difference, right? AI is one thing, automation is something else. But once you start combining the two, that's where you start getting to that agentic, right? I think personally, it's kind of a nuanced question because each federal government, each program in that federal government has their own requirements for how much they want AI to be included into their ecosystem and how much they want it to augment their existing staff and their existing processes. I think fast forward 5 years from now, you're going to see obviously more agentic AI acting upon it for itself with the proper guidelines, policies, right? So that's going to shape how AI is going to be federated and trusted, I think, ultimately. But I think the other part is, and let me just be candid about this, like AI doesn't necessarily solve every problem, right? So it's a tool just like anything else. And it's, what are you trying to solve with that tool? Ultimately defines what kind of AI system you plan to use in the future.
Okay, so I loved what you just said there, and I think just to reference an America's AI Action Plan, which came out, I believe, in July, and it's a good read. It sort of sets the tone, and I know a lot of companies out there, like yours, are looking at and trying to make sense of it, but at the end of the day, it comes into meeting with the agency, meeting with the individual in charge at the agency. It's hard to find that person sometimes, and talk about, well, what is the problem you're trying to solve at the agency? And that's what I like that you just said there is like, that's the question, right? What is what is it we can do to help solve your problem versus the, what's keeping you up at night? Because you need all the tools in your toolbox. It's just knowing which ones
That's right.
that you need to leverage or take advantage of. That's what I heard you just say, having
correct.
many tools in the toolbox. Okay, I love that. I love that. All right, well, listen. So AI, great. I'm going to list a couple that I did a little for fiscal year 26. I'm just going to throw out some trends. Good man. The first one that came up: agentic AI and multi-agent systems, AI supercomputing, and edge AI. These were just top tech trends in 26. Quantum computing, physical AI, and robotics. I mean, these are the ones that are coming up as trends that I would think agencies are looking at, and companies like yours are knowing how to protect. AR, XR, intelligent wearables, geopatriation, and sovereign clouds. Are these just a few of those that you're focused on? And did I miss one or two that?
I mean, that's a pretty big list.
Yeah.
And I'm saying you probably did miss a few, but I think you've got the salient points here. I think the takeaway from that list is, again, what we discussed. AI is going to be part of everything. I think one thing that we haven't talked about, but I think it's important, is quantum's impact to not only AI, but to systems in the future, right? So to me, quantum in general is going to be the next, computer revolution, whereas AI is more of like an intelligence revolution, an automation, a whatever, that's it. Whereas quantum is a physical computer revolution. That is going in combination with AI. I think you'll see tremendous growth from that. And I think that when quantum is fully realized, when it's no longer producing as many errors as it is today, it's going to be necessarily as big as AI, but the impact will be akin to the rollout of the internet, right? And it fundamentally changes what kind of computing power you have access to. And as you get more intelligent models, as you're asking AI to do more, you're going to start asking quantum to get involved because of its innate ability to do more computing.
Thank you for that, because when I did a follow-on search on top cybersecurity trends on top of that, quantum security and post-quantum cryptography, AI security platforms and preemptive cyber, regulatory overhaul, and geopolitical cyber warfare. I mean, you're clearly in the space. Maximus is fortunate to have you. So knowing that, though, on trends and horizons and things, and with the government spending, more than $100 billion, however you want to look it up, on IT support and services annually. I don't want to get into the impact of a breach and things, but we know that, boy, oh boy, if you're not protecting your infrastructure, the ping power pipe, the people, the constant education and teaching, when you think about a cybersecurity roadmap, how do you think about that when you go into an agency? Just what are some of your things you want to walk out of that first meeting with? Because you're there to be the, hey, are you thinking about this, CIO, CTO, CDO, whatever it is, Chief AI Officer? What are you hoping to convey with this future focus that Maximus has?
Yeah, I'm going to put my cybersecurity hat back on. And with that comes immediately to your policy and governance, right? Do you have a governance model for your cybersecurity practice? Most companies, most federal agencies do. But is that transcending into your AI governance and your data governance, right? So one thing I just point out briefly is, like, if you don't have a strong data governance policy, and in particular how you label data, AI is not necessarily going to solve that problem. You're going to have to fix that problem to really utilize all of AI in the future. But just starting at the governance part, start with governance, right? So what are the policies that you need to start with, what you're referencing to ensure that you are securing your environment correctly, followed by your cyber operations. Like, how strong is that? What technologies are you adopting in the future? For example, agentic AI, right? To get at some of, for a quick example would be alert fatigue at the tier 1, tier 2 level of your SOC, right? So your Security Operations Center is what SOC stands for. That's a real problem, right? So as these attacks become more complicated through the use of AI, through bad actors using AI, just like we use it to defend against AI, those alerts, that fatigue that those tier 1 are going to see, it is increasingly, right? And so that's one of the reasons why, at least in the cyber world, AI is becoming something of interest, right? So how do we kind of reduce the noise, get at the actual issues at hand, and then prosecute those issues. I think you'll see that, and then I think lastly you'll start seeing, a federated roadmap for the adoption of agentic AI. Quantum's definitely going to be there. You mentioned some other ones in regards to geofencing, et cetera, and that's just simply, in my mind, you start looking at your zero trust model and the way that you do that different than your defense in depth, but more of you just don't trust anybody, right? Trust but verify. Don't trust and always verify, excuse me. You'll start seeing that play out in the federal space at a grander scale. Because as you know, the zero trust model is something, it is just a model, a framework, but when you start getting that into the federal space, you'll start wanting to adopt some of these technologies soonest to kind of, again, harden your system in a way that protects you from a lot of these more advanced cyber scenarios.
Well, that was an incredible mouthful of things to think about, and I always like to kind of close out my interviews with like a parting shot, and that was one hell of a parting shot. So I'm still going to ask you that, by the way. But one of the things that I loved what you just mentioned was going back to just your growth, your journey, learning about cyber along the way, right? Whether it's the data center that popped up, then cloud comes out. I was there when, if you remember Vivek Kundra, when he got on a stage in 2000, I think it was 9, I was down at the Federal Executive Institute, believe it or not, and he brought in this, we're going to go to the cloud mentality, and I was like, wow, and that became the thing. And as you mentioned, zero trust, the Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things. If we're going to be in a digitally, ubiquitously connected world, how do you trust all this? And that's where I see this passion and knowledge that you have, and your team, mind you, being of serious value to the federal government. So I want to thank you for that. So before I get to your parting shot, I just want to thank you for being on Bits, Bytes, and Insights. Your perspective and your highlights, I think, are very similar to mine as a former who's out here celebrating those that are taking it every day and getting up and eat, sleeping, and drinking their passion. Cybersecurity is not just about technology, it's about people, trust, and purpose. The work you and your team that are doing at Maximus is crucial in boosting our nation's resilience and ensuring that the innovation continues to support the public good. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about Maximus and the incredible work that they're doing across defense and federal agencies, visit www.maximus.com. So with that, I'm going to give the floor back to my man here, Kynan. Parting shot. I just like something that you want to leave with the audience, a takeaway based on the conversation we had today.
Yeah, I'll try to make it succinct and just kind of pithy. Like, cybersecurity is a culture and a mindset. It's a culture in the sense that you have to basically be cyber-centric. In other words, think about cybersecurity when you do your daily lives. And then essentially, like, to me, I think that's paramount, right? So I like to use, and this is a quick reference point, like, we all do cybersecurity at home, either we realize it or not. We do both physical, we also do, your traditional cybersecurity. We just do it because it's right to do. And we all do this from locking our doors, putting locks on our door, that's physical security, to putting a firewall that's built into our router and our network to protect us, right? So cybersecurity is imperative. And that's kind of where my mind goes to.
I love it. It's part of the culture. It's not something you do and meet a compliance exercise as a result of, but something that is living and breathing in the culture of you and as well as Maximus. Awesome. Well, I'm Pete Saronis. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bits, Bytes, and Insights. And until next time, keep connecting the dots, building bridges, and understanding how technology is truly something that we human beings need to get through the day.